What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Star Wars Explained. Today, I'm very excited to have a special guest joining us to talk about his new book, Master of Evil. Please welcome back Adam Christopher to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm just thinking it's probably the same background I had like 3 years ago. I need to kind of lift up my studio game, I think.
I like it. The first thing I thought was I liked seeing the Lawson back there.
Oh yeah, okay, that's new. Yeah. Happy days.
Well, it's been a while since I've gotten to interview someone after their book has come out, but now that it has come out, how does that feel? Is it a big relief?
Yeah, because it was a really long time coming. I mean, the book was announced, I think, probably 9 months ago, maybe more. But like Shadow of the Sith, my first Star Wars book came out in June 2022, I think. And it was like the next day we started talking about Darth Vader. So, like, behind the scenes, it's been 3 years in various things. So, yeah, it's good to be out. It's exciting. It's nerve-wracking, but it's exciting.
Did Shadow of the Sith kind of lead into Master of Evil in a way, since you were dealing with the Sith and the dark side already?
I don't know, actually. It's funny because someone mentioned it the other day. It's like, oh, I write dark side stuff. But, like, Shadow of the Sith is a Luke Skywalker book.
Yeah.
It just happens that the villain is kind of dark and scary. So yeah, there's definitely an influence, but it's one of those things where I can't even remember where it came from. It's like Mr. Darth Vader novel. I'm like, yeah, did I think of that? Yeah, let's say I did.
There are definitely people out there, including me, who are calling Master of Evil kind of like a Gothic horror. Would you agree with that? Was that intentional?
Yes and no. So it was always going to be a horror tinged novel. And in fact, to contradict what I just said, yeah, maybe actually something from the aftermath of Shadow of the Sith made that kind of idea like come to a head. It's like, yeah, okay, Shadow of the Sith was kind of dark and spooky. So in parts, so let's do something for Vader of the same kind of thing. The weird thing is about this book, like I got the cover for it quite early because, as people know, it's a pre-existing piece of artwork that was then kind of updated a little bit for the book. So when they sent it to me, when Elizabeth sent it to me, it really, I was still writing the book, so it really helped to kind of focus that Gothic darkness even more than like what I had originally anticipated. The fact that like over your shoulder I can see the cover, and because even from a distance it's got this this quality about it which just, it's kind of freaky and kind of scary and so powerful. So like the cover, I'm thankful for the cover. It's like doing a lot of work for me in a way. But yeah, so Darth Vader is the villain of Star Wars, of at least part of the Star Wars saga. So it was important to remind us that he is actually dark and scary. So it had to be a dark and scary book. Having said that, I would hesitate to call it a horror novel, or even Star Wars horror novel, because it's a Star Wars book, and the idea for me is always, as a Star Wars fan, like if you walk into a bookstore and you see that book and it says Star Wars, it's got Darth Vader on the front, it's called Master of Evil. Like, you don't need to know any more than that. You'd be like, yeah, I like Star Wars, I like Darth Vader, I'll read the book. And you don't have to worry about, is it too dark, is it too scary? Like, because Star Wars is Star Wars, and even though because Star Wars is so amazing that you can tell different kinds of stories within the Star Wars saga, it has natural boundaries, which are really good, which are great, because a Star Wars story is always a Star Wars story, and that's what you try and distill into a book when you write it, or a comic, or whatever. So yeah, it's a dark and scary book about Darth Vader, but like it's in Gothic horror, like you mentioned, is a really interesting way to describe it. And yeah, I agree absolutely, but also not to worry people that it's too dark, too scary. It's Star Wars. It's a good time, but perhaps in a slightly darker way.
It's interesting. I guess I leaned into Gothic horror a little bit because it reminded me of reading Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I read it recently, like a year, maybe two ago. And reading that book today, you're like, obviously, this count is a vampire. Like, we all know all the rules of vampires. And I just kind of saw a lot of that in Darth Vader because he is not the primary point of view. It's a lot of people who are surrounding him kind of going like, who's this guy that just popped up and he's dark and scary. Was there any inspiration from other stories like Dracula, or did that just kind of happen as a coincidence?
Was interesting you mentioned Dracula. This is like this made me think of it way back at the beginning, although it wasn't a direct influence. Probably, I mean, I read Dracula, well, actually recently, like you, but I first read it a long, long time ago. Um, one of the ideas I had for the Vader novel was to write it in that kind of epistolary format, where it's like told by, Dracula is told by journal entries, newspaper clippings, letters, that kind of thing. That crossed my mind for this book, maybe subconsciously kind of channeling that kind of Dracula vibe, but I then realized it would be so difficult to do in a novel. I don't know how people do it. But yeah, so Dracula, to use your comparison, it's called Dracula. It's a book about Dracula, and Dracula is the main character, but he's also not the main character because it's told from the point of view of other people. And that's really important because, like you said, if you go back to the beginning and you don't have any of the kind of pre-knowledge that we have now, we don't know who Dracula is or what he's doing or what he's going to do. We don't know how dangerous he is and how evil he is. All we know is that he's a mystery, and we learn about that mystery through the point of view of the people that come in contact with him. Now, Vader is sort of the same. So he's one of, if not the most important character in at least the Skywalker saga, perhaps. If you go back to 1977, the first time we see him is like he storms into the ship after the stormtroopers have come in, hands on hips, looks around. You have to imagine what it was like in 1977. Like, for viewers, this guy is like, he's huge and like looks so weird and scary, and he's got the the respirator, and he's clearly, we forget how strange he looks. His mask, it's kind of like it's actually a skull. And we forget that these days because we're so, Darth Vader is not only ingrained in Star Wars, but like it's ingrained in pop culture, that we forget the kind of origins and the impact he would have had originally. So transpose that to the Star Wars universe. This is a book set right after Revenge of the Sith, so like nobody knows who Vader is. The whole point of the book is presenting the mystery of Vader, like Dracula presents the mystery of Dracula. And although we never see Dracula's point of view, you wouldn't argue that the book is not called Dracula. in Master of Evil, it was important not to see that point of view, because the whole point is the mystery around him and how he's viewed by others. To get to your question of like what was influencing it, probably actually Dracula. It's one of those things where you don't realize what you're doing until you kind of do it, and it's kind of after the fact. But Dracula's a really good comparison. I mean, I like, people would have seen it from Shadow of the Sith. Like, I do like dark horror books. I'm not so into the kind of like, well, especially if you compare it to movies, like I'm not really into body horror or kind of extreme slasher, that style. I'm more into the kind of atmosphere, creep and dread, and I like the fact that horror is, if not a genre, well, not even a genre in Star Wars, but like it's more like a flavor that you can put onto other kinds of stories. So you can have a science fiction horror novel, which I've written for my own stuff, and perhaps you can have a Star Wars horror novel, Like you can have a Star Wars romance, like you can have a science fiction romance or a science fiction detective story. These are they are genres, yes, but they're also things that can kind of blend, with other genres and other types of stories. So yeah, so from my own kind of background, it's like absolutely I like dark stuff and I like horror, but more on the existential dread.
I think that absolutely comes across. You mentioned atmosphere and dread, like the temple, the Deso temple is full of atmosphere. Like that, once we got to that point, I was so leaning in to everything going on. So what was it like to create that? And not only creating the temple, but the fact that it's like eternally locked in hyperspace was incredible. I was like over the moon with that. I thought that was such a cool idea that made sense. But I was like, how have we not seen this before? How did you come up with all that?
That's interesting. In the High Republic, the whole hyperspace accident thing, major inciting incident in that period of Star Wars is interesting because it made me think of the fact that even if hyperspace is like another dimension that you use to travel faster than light, things still have a physical presence. So like, you can crash into something, which is like, sounds obvious, but actually how do these dimensions even work? So I thought, well, if you can have objects in hyperspace and you can crash into them, then what if you had something in hyperspace that wasn't moving? Because it's like we associate it with that kind of, the tunnel, the starlight and faster light travel. So I thought, well, let's reverse that. And like, what if you had something that was stationary and therefore you could hide something? So I had to so I came up with something that was kind of like, fits within the Star Wars universe because Star Wars has multiple dimensions that are sort of talked about in different kind of stories. And the thing is also, you don't want to explain it perfectly because it's again, it's a setting and a mystery and it's part of the story. So like, yeah, it absolutely has an explanation, but it's like, yeah, where would Dooku hide a temple? He's going to hide it somewhere where Sidious can't feel it. So how would you do that? Well, you're going to remove it from normal space, hide it in hyperspace. You can go and collect it later, and he's got this wonderful super tactical droid who's going to help him out, he thinks. Well, no, he knows. But then it's like, Dooku got busy and the Clone Wars continued and we all know what happened. And meanwhile, the temple is just sitting there waiting.
What was the discussion like surrounding, I don't know, the rules of it? Was there any convincing that you needed to do for this to work? Because I think it's rad. I think it works perfectly, but I'm curious what the back and forth was.
I don't think there was any problem because, okay, so again, spoilers. It's not a spoiler. The ship that the temple is in is anchored in hyperspace. And the hyperspace anchors are obviously a very advanced technology that we haven't seen elsewhere in Star Wars. But there's reasons for why we haven't seen that. And I think so long as I could build a story where all that kind of stuff is explained, like you don't need to explain everything. You don't need to fill every piece of the puzzle box. You don't need to take every, was it dot a guy and cross every T? Because if you start doing that, then like, what are you doing? Just writing an article, Wikipedia article. But so long as there was an internal logic to the story, and there was there was a reason why we don't see hyperspace anchors elsewhere, then, and amongst other things, then it works, and that's kind of why they, which is the good thing, is they have the confidence to let the author do what they want because they trust. They pick authors and because they think that a particular author suits a particular kind of story, and it's like you go for it, and surprise us as well. But yeah, it seemed to work, and it's kind of fun. And again, it goes back to like you talk about atmosphere, dread, creep, that kind of horror thing. It's like when that also is not just characters like Vader and what he does, but like it's places and settings. And I think again, I was writing the book when I got the cover. I was like, okay, let's turn it up a little bit when it comes to this ship and the temple. Let's like when they go to the ship in hyperspace, a few characters kind of meet up there. The walls are bleeding, and it's like this. Yeah, the temple itself has an influence on the ship.
Kind of along those same lines of creeping dread and just the horror elements, how did you develop the idea of like a droid possession? It actually felt very natural coming off of the Dark Droids comics that came out about a year ago, but that super tactical droid taking over a cyborg's implant, I was like, this is great.
That's actually a good point. Yeah. Okay, I mean, everyone knows that when you do a Star Wars book, you do an outline. Like any tie-in, I've done Doctor Who, Stranger Things, World of Warcraft. Outline's part of the process because a lot of people need to see it and make sure that you're telling the story that needs to be told, that kind of thing. So Sarnath, which is the super tactical droid, yeah, he takes over someone who has a cybernetic implant. It just seemed the obvious thing to do because I'd put Sarnath in this ship and like he's kind of rusted himself into the controls. But it's one of those things I think that evolved naturally from the characters because the character Keel, who works for Cybot Galactica, the droid manufacturer, yeah, he's got a cyborg implant, kind of a bit like Lobot type deal. Because he's this kind of, he's a scientist, he's a kind of tech bro kind of engineer. Well, he is a little bit, I think. He's looking for profit. Yeah. So he meets Sarnath, and yeah, Sarnath kind of takes him over. But like it was just one of those things. I thought, yeah, because again, you don't know what you're doing until you've kind of done it. One of the other characters is a droid TC-99 who can swap the matrices of other droids into him, and they don't take him over. Well, they don't take him over, but he can acquire their kind of knowledge and experience for various reasons. That obviously came from 000, I think, isn't it? In the Dr. Aphra comics, 000, who's like an assassin droid, the whole concept of a droid matrix, like that's what the mind and personality and experience of a droid is, or where it is stored. So TC-99 kind of came out of that. I thought, what if you could just switch droid matrices? But like that's a similar sort of thing. It's like, well, it's like a possession, and in fact, I don't want to spoil it, but like something happens to TC-99 when he switches matrices. So it all kind of relates to each other. But again, it's like you're not super aware that you're doing it. It sounds so pretentious. My writing. But like you don't know the parallels that you get between the characters until afterwards.
That's funny. I just figured that was completely intentional. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's intentional, but yeah. But then you're like, oh, that's a very good idea. And I think Sarnath, the idea of I like the fact that the super tactical droids in established Star Wars, they've got names rather than kind of numbers, which is an interesting kind of thing in itself for a droid and kind of droid personality because they're so advanced. But yeah, he's been waiting for Dooku. Dooku never showed up, so he's got to do something. And he does.
Well, to jump off of TC-99, I'd love to talk about Goth a little bit. I thought he was really interesting, really cool. We don't get to jump into the heads of the Imperial or any of the Royal Guards very often. So what was it like to develop him as a character?
Yeah, I mean, I love Goth and TC-99. Their friendship is very, it's very real because, Goth has modified TC-99 and kind of freed TC-99 from that kind of his programming. So they're a real kind of partnership. I needed someone who could get close to Vader because the whole point was like, we're going to be seeing Vader from someone else's point of view, which goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. It's like the whole point is we don't know who Vader is or what he is. We are going to find this out because this is literally days, weeks after Revenge of the Sith. So to kind of reintroduce Vader as a mystery to everybody, you have to have that other point of view. So we have Goth, who, he's a complicated character because, like, he's Imperial and he's pleased that the Empire has arrived and he's pleased that the Republic has gone away. Because he's like, well, the Jedi were kind of, they called themselves defenders of the galaxy, and like, why were they even generals in the Clone Wars? He's a career officer. He's like, we needed soldiers and commanders, not just figureheads. And he didn't really believe in the Force or that side of things. So he's like, finally, the Empire's here. It's order, peace, prosperity. Yes, you got to use a firm hand, but this is for the greater good, kind of thing. So he's kind of like, he starts off as like a true believer, but then I think he makes some discoveries, or not discoveries, more realizes when he sees, he sticks with Vader for most of the book. He kind of sees what the Emperor's doing and what Vader's doing and how he does it. And this is the thing of, like, in the book, there's these two storylines where there's Vader is looking for what he thinks is the external answer to his question. Goth is commanded to follow Vader, but he has kind of his own reasons as well why Vader is interesting. And again, at the beginning, he's seeking the answers to what he thinks is like an external truth. But what both of them discover is that truth is actually, the answer to the question, that truth is actually inside themselves rather than an external thing. Now, this is just character and storyline. Like, story comes from character, and this whole thing of characters discovering the truth inside themselves is what storytelling is all about. But to be able to kind of do that in parallel with Vader and Goth, so Goth and TC-99 are kind of this double act, and then there's Vader. Goth's storyline has many parallels to Vader.
They're both kind of seeking to become masters over life and death.
Yeah, that's right. But then they realize that perhaps there's something else that they're looking for as well. And, if someone said yesterday, launch day, there's the glimpses of Anakin and Vader in some of the things that he does in the book. And like, they're just flashes and then they're there. And it's like, yeah, we can't see Vader's point of view because he is the other. He's an outsider. He's the thing that he's been through, we cannot imagine. Like, his transformation physically and mentally, he's the chosen one. We cannot understand what he has gone through or what he is going through. And we can't see that because the more that we see, we diminish the mystery and we diminish the point of Vader, which is really super important, I think, for the book. So, it's a Darth Vader book. It's also a book about Darth Vader. Like, Dracula's a book. Dracula's a book about Dracula. So seeing that internal questioning, sort of, from Vader through the eyes of Goth is super important. And yeah, Goth's the Royal Guard, which means he can get really close.
And yeah, I love that you even pointed out which specific Royal Guard he is.
Okay, that came later, because I was like, okay, all the kind of research you do, watch the movies, obviously, absorb every kind of bit of Vader that I possibly can. Because when you write any character that's pre-existing, and especially one that people have loved for nearly 50 years now with Vader, like, you have to get it 100% right, or it doesn't work. So first task is like absorb everything about Vader, and then try and channel that onto the page, which meant watching Revenge of the Sith multiple times, which is great, because I love it. But there was a point where I thought, yeah, I need to get that whole, the best scene in all of Star Wars when Palpatine talks to Anakin about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. It's like, I have to get that in there somehow. I don't know how, because there's only two people in the opera booth at the opera house. And then I watched it and I was like, wait a second, there's a Royal Guard standing behind the Chancellor. So that's Goth. Like, he's in Revenge of the Sith. He's been there all the time. He's been there for 20 years. And of course, he's within earshot easily of the conversation that Palpatine has with Anakin, the most famous conversation in all of Star Wars, which he overhears. And in fact, because in the course of Master of Evil, especially near the beginning, when Goth is trying to work out who Vader is, and realizing that there's more has gone on with the transition from Republic to Empire than he even begins to imagine. Like he was one of the people that like cleared out the bodies from the temple, and he was at the ceremony where the lightsabers were burned. So like he's very close to all that. He then gets assigned to escort Vader to a planet, this backward planet Deso, and then there's a point where like Vader ignites a lightsaber, and then Goth is like, how is this guy got a lightsaber? What does that mean? The Jedi are all dead, and this lightsaber's red, but all the lightsabers were burned. But is this guy a Jedi, or is he something else? Like he realizes that the situation the galaxy's in is way more complicated than he ever imagined. But it's because that closeness, Royal Guard. I mean, Royal Guard's really cool, and I thought I wanted actually to go on and on about this too much. Yeah, the action figures. I don't think I'm going. The Royal Guard action figure, the original, which nice and accurate, and had like a kind of felt cloak that was glued to the mask on their little, six injection figures. Underneath that cloak was this really deep maroon uniform with a kind of quilted tunic thing, which I thought was also very cool. And in fact, the mask is so bright red and the cloak is bright red, but the underneath is maroon. So I stuck Goth on a maroon jacket and made that canon.
I loved the idea that like there's another Imperial uniform color. That's kind of what I envisioned. Yeah.
Well, it's like, as we see it, like even in something like Andor, the ISB wear white. They also wear light grey. There's like all, the Empire is more complicated than we know because we only see bits of it. Like Vader's life is more complicated. The story is more complicated. People say, well, we know everything there is to know about Vader. We've seen him from childhood to death. It's like, we know everything about him. Well, no, you don't, because like people are complicated and Vader is a very complicated character. But yeah, things like being able to do that, like, okay, with the Royal Guard, when they're not wearing their cloaks and masks, and they're officers, some of them, they're going to be wearing officer uniforms, but like they're in an elite position, so they'll be wearing maroon tunics.
You also brought up Vader's lightsaber, and the first chapter, I think, kind of recaps Charles Soule's comic. What was it like to revisit that? And then I would love to talk about how you found this very specific point in Charles Soule's comic run to place this novel.
So specific as well. I really enjoyed writing to that chapter that you mentioned, and I think it was released as one of the excerpts. It's like, Vader bleeding his kyber crystal. It always struck me that is such a foundational part of the character of Vader. And it's amazing we didn't see it anywhere else. Like, it's never been in any portrayal in kind of modern canon. And Charles Soule's comic, the 2017 volume of Darth Vader, is really, really good. It's like my favorite Star Wars comic. And this is also why I thought, like, if we're going to have a Vader book in 2025, which is going to be the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith, it's got to be a Revenge of the Sith book, which means it had to be set super close to Revenge of the Sith, which meant it was going to interact with Charles Soule's comic, because that comic literally is the very next camera shot from the end of Revenge of the Sith. And in that comic, you see Vader take a Jedi's lightsaber, which is referred to in my book because that's important. That's how he gets his lightsaber, because Obi-Wan has walked off with his actual one. And then bleeding the kyber crystal. And the kyber crystal scene in the comic is such an important one, and it's really powerfully done. So I really enjoyed it. Like, it's almost like novelizing that section of the comic, because I'm a Star Wars nerd. Like, it had to be accurate to the comic because the comic is canon. Like, so I had to make sure I got it, like, this is accurate. But at the same time, I wanted to extend past what we see in the comic because that is where Master of Evil kind of takes off as its own story. So it kind of almost bounces off the comic. It intersects and then it goes off on this tangent. And I'm glad I got it in book form, that the whole bleeding scene, because it's super important. And you can kind of take what was in the comic and maybe give it a not more depth, but like a little extra something, because you can do that in a novel. You know, you can take your time. As for the positioning, you can probably correct me on this if I get it wrong. Is it like issue 5 and it's between?
Yeah, issue 6, and it's like between pages like 4 and 5 or something.
Vader bleeds the kyber crystal, comes back. His armor's all smashed up. Comes back to Coruscant, starts repairing his armor in the comic, and the Emperor's like, "Great, you've got a lightsaber. When you're ready, come to me. There is much work to be done," or words to that effect. And then the next thing that happens in the comic is that Vader's interrupted by this intruder in the old Jedi archive, which leads into the whole Inquisitor storyline. But it's like, what was Palpatine talking about? There's much work to be done. And then like, obviously Vader does a lot of things in the comics, but specifically on that story point, he doesn't come back to it. Or you could interpret that he doesn't come back to it. The end of page 5, Emperor goes away, Vader is still fixing his armor. Next page, intruder in the Jedi archive, and there's like 1 or 2 panels, Vader is still repairing his armor. So you're like, okay, it's continuous. Except there's no background on those panels. And I thought, what if he's repairing his armor from something else? We don't know. So it's like, I could put a whole novel in between those 2 panels. But from a practical point of view, as ridiculous as that may sound, it means that I could touch on things in the comics and tell a new Darth Vader story, knowing where Vader goes to later on in not just the comics, but in other medium. And I could set, because of the time frame, I could set the foundation for those things. You know, Vader tries to find Padme again. You know, he has more visions later in the comic, and the Vader Immortal VR video game, that's the whole point of like opening a portal and going through and getting Padme. It's like, yeah, we've heard those stories before, absolutely. But you have to think, when was the first time that Vader tried that? And when was the first time that he came to the realization that that was something that he could do? So this is the jumping off point from the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, because if the Emperor said he was going to teach Vader some things and he doesn't, then Vader's like, I'm going to go and find those secrets myself. So, you know, keeping in mind the chronology of Vader, this is the first time he's doing any of that. Yeah, and it absolutely comes to define his character and personality going forward. But like, that is the point.
How was it to tell that story about Darth Vader without using him much as a POV character? Because there are a few chapters, but was it difficult to follow him around? Were there ever any points where you were like, I wish I could just dive into him more, but you were showing restraint?
I think, well, it's almost like, well, I kind of, this analogy, maybe it doesn't quite work, but like Rogue One, the movie, my favorite scene, probably the favorite scene of everybody, one of the greatest scenes in Star Wars, Vader's showing up at the end in the corridor scene, ignites his lightsaber, kills everybody. Like, it's really terrible, but he's also really cool. So you're kind of like, yay, oh, he's killing everybody. But he's cool, but they're the good guys. But it's movies. But like, that comes on the back of 2 hours of Rogue One, which is a really great movie. But like, you couldn't have 2 hours of hallway scene because there'd be no point, and it would diminish the impact of the scene when you get to it. So with Vader, it's like, yes, you do see, maybe more than people think, you do see things from his point of view, and you can understand the kind of things that he's experiencing and thinking and feeling, even in an indirect way, in the specific parts where it is just him, whether it's visions, or whether it's, you know, bleeding the kyber crystal, but also through his interactions with the others around him, which kind of goes back to the Dracula thing. There's a point where Vader kind of disappears for a bit, but his absence in the story only serves to focus the story on him more. And I think Vader is such a powerful character that even when he's not there, it's all about him. And in fact, maybe when he's not there, it's even more about him. Which is like, you know, he's a tentpole character of the Star Wars universe and such an icon within Star Wars. He's an icon in pop culture. He's like one of the most famous movie characters ever in Western mythmaking. And again, we forget that because he's all pervasive and we see him all the time and we know his silhouette instantly. But we need to think about why that archetype is so strong and why he has that presence. So to get to your point about like, should there be more? The scenes that we get into his head, I mean, there's spoilers, there's visions. He has visions. He goes into some cool visions. This is the hallway scene from Rogue One. This is like, you can't diminish the mystery, because if you do that, the more you do, the less you get out of it. You know, what's that phrase? Like, too much of a good thing, or
just diminishing returns.
Diminishing returns. And when you're talking about horror, and the kind of horror that we were talking about before, the kind of more existential, atmospheric, creepy, dread horror, which to me is more kind of scary than monsters and blood and all that kind of stuff. It's what you don't see that is the scary bit. It's like you don't see the monster behind the door, you see the shadow underneath the door, and that's far more scary, because then you kind of, what your mind builds about that goes well beyond what you could ever see or read or write. So Vader he's the main character of the book. Goth is also the main character of the book. Those two things can coexist. Vader's select point of view is super important in where it was positioned in the book. For the reasons I just said, it's like less is more with Vader. And again, this is the whole part of the book.
This is just a question that I've been curious about, not about a Star Wars book, just about book writing in general, but you titled all the chapters in your book, and I'm just curious what drives that decision, why sometimes an author will just write chapter 1, or sometimes each title or chapter has a title, and also how you went about choosing the titles.
It's one of those things I think you just know, when you're writing it what you kind of want to do. And I think Master of Evil was a different kind of book, and I wanted a different kind of chapter title. I thought numbers would be fine, but maybe a little bit more would be good. And I don't often do that. The thing about Master of Evil is that the chapter titles are actually sort of little mini quotes from within the chapters.
Yeah.
Which I did absolutely steal from another book. But I remember, this years ago, I remember reading that other book, I can't remember what it was, realizing what was going on with the chapter titles. And then when you kind of get to the chapter title within the chapter, you're like, oh, that's really cool, that's the chapter title. And you can be quite obtuse or obscure. One of my favorite chapter titles is Make It Bleed, which is the chapter of Vader bleeding the kyber crystal. It's a direct quote from Palpatine, because Palpatine says make it bleed. But I thought that is such a powerful 3 words for a book like this. That is absolutely the chapter title. And I think from there, I was like, okay, what if I actually just did some quotes for the rest of it? To kind of, sometimes they throw the reader off deliberately, because you're not really sure the context, but then that's all part of the thing. But again, it's personal preference, and I think every author's different, and a lot of my books just have numbers. Some have like titles. But for me, titles are difficult. Yeah, titles for a book in general are difficult. So I remember once, yeah, trying to come up with like 40 titles for chapters after I'd written a book. The book itself didn't have a title. So it's just like, what am I going to do? It was really painful. So I tried to avoid that.
Well, that's the last question I had. So I wanted to remind everyone that Master of Evil is out now. So is Shadow of the Sith, and they're both great. People have been loving Shadow of the Sith for years now, and I've really, really dug Master of Evil. I hope everyone else does too. So, where can people find you online? And I'd like to give you a chance to share other works you've written, Star Wars or not, that you think Star Wars fans would enjoy.
Oh, thank you. So you can find me on Instagram as Adam Christopher Writer, and I'm on Blue Sky as adamchristopher.me, which is also my website. I've got a book coming out in 2026, March 2026, called Crawl Space, which is a science fiction horror, strangely enough. So people like the dark stuff in Shadow of the Sith and Master of Evil, they might want to check out Crawl Space. Yeah, and then I've got some things coming. This is the problem. It's like I can't. I probably said this 3 years ago when you asked me the same question, so I
Yeah.
can't talk about it. At the time, it would have been, yeah, I'm working on a Darth Vader novel, and I couldn't tell you.
Okay, fun. Well, I like just the very obscure. You've got some things coming. Great.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us about Master of Evil. Can't wait to see what else you've got cooking. And yeah, Crawl Space sounds good too. So, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and may the force be with you.